Hello and welcome to the channel, and I am here for a list video for you guys, and for this list video I'm going to be going over 5 underrated debut albums from rock and metal bands. Now this is not necessarily a top 5, these are just 5 albums that are debut albums that I think are kind of underrated, so I figured why not talk about them. So let's go ahead and get started with this video. Now, the first album I want to talk about here is from Trivium. Now, Trivium is probably one of my favorite metalcore bands, maybe even my favorite, maybe my second favorite. You guys probably already know what my favorite is, but anyhow, the album I want to talk about first is Trivium and their album Ember to Inferno. And yeah, I think there's some people that can agree that this album is underrated. Now, I would not say that this is one of Trivium's best. As a matter of fact, it's actually closer to, I guess, the second half of the ranking, I guess, if I were to rank the Trivium albums nowadays. It's not one of their best, but it's still a very solid album. I do really like this one. I mean, you got songs like Pillars of Serpents, If I Could Collapse the Masses, Requiem, and the title track. Now, the title track was actually the first Trivium song that I've ever heard, believe it or not. I know that's not many people's first, but it was my first. So, yeah, but Ember to Inferno by Trivium, really great album. This album had to make the list. I think it's kind of underrated. Now, the next album up is from Demon Hunter, and it is, of course, Demon Hunter's self-titled debut. Now, Demon Hunter is probably my favorite within the metalcore subgenre. Like I said, either this band or Trivium is my favorite. But yeah, Demon Hunter, definitely a very unique band in metalcore for sure. Definitely one of the most diverse metalcore bands. In fact, I think they are the most diverse, at least in my opinion. They just deliver something that, I don't know, most metalcore bands just don't do, in my opinion. But yeah, but this is still a very great album. Now, one thing I've noticed about some Demon Hunter fans, there's some people that say that this is closer to the bottom of the ranking, but for me, not really. I actually like this album more than albums like Summer of Darkness, believe it or not. I know that's kind of an unpopular opinion, but I don't know. I just really like the raw intensity of this album and just the amount of influence that went into this album. I mean, you got some new metal, some industrial metal, and metalcore, of course. I mean, just, you know, ingredients like that are placed on this album. It just really works, and it's a very strong debut album, and it's a very Slipknot-inspired album for sure, so if you're a fan of Slipknot, check out this album. You might like it. But yeah, some highlights for me from this album would be Infected, My Throat is an Open Grave, Through the Black, and Turn Your Back and Run, which I think is an underrated Demon Hunter song. But yeah, pretty strong album. So Demon Hunter, the debut album, that album had to make the list. Next up, this album is from Dream Theater, and it is Dream Theater, When Dream and Day Unite. I know there's a lot of people that say that this is Dream Theater's weakest album, and this album easily had to make this list for that reason, because there's some people that say, oh, this is one of Dream Theater's weakest, if not their weakest album. For me, I don't think it's their weakest. Now, I will admit, it is closer to the second half of the ranking if I were to rank Dream Theater's discography. I will admit this album would be somewhere in the second half of the ranking, but even in saying that, I don't think it's their weakest album. I think this album is actually pretty solid for the most part. I mean, sure, it doesn't have the same replay value as the James LaBrie albums with Dream Theater, but this is still a very good album. Obviously, this was when they had a different vocalist that wasn't James LaBrie, but a couple favorites from mine from this album would be A Fortune in Lies and Afterlife. Afterlife, I think, is probably the best song on the album, in my opinion. I just really appreciate the, I guess, the influence going on in this album. I mean, this was, of course, the start to Dream Theater's discography, and it's just good 80s metal. That's really all there is to say about it. I mean, I've heard some people say that the vocalist at this time sounded like a Dollar General Geddy Lee or something like that. I don't know. It's a little silly. I can't remember who said that, but I think it's funny but silly at the same time. But yeah, I think this is a pretty good album. So, When Dream and Day Unite by Dream Theater. Definitely not as bad as some people make it out to be. Really, I don't think any of Dream Theater's albums are, you could say, are really bad, but yeah. So next up, this album is from the band Yes, and it is, of course, Yes's debut album. Yes is, of course, one of my favorite progressive rock bands, and yeah, this album, it's not one of their best, but it's still a very good album. I mean, this album would definitely not be in my top 5 favorite Yes albums or anything, but I still think it's a very good album. I mean, you got songs like Beyond and Before, Looking Around, and Survival. Survival is probably the best song on the album. I actually really like that song. So yeah, Yes's debut album. Like I said, not one of their best, but I think it's a good album. So that's what's coming up next. Now, lastly, for number 5, this is a band that definitely means a lot to me, because I don't know where I'd be in my musical journey without this band, because this was technically the first band that I really heavily got into. I mean, this was the band that really started to make me fall more in love with rock and metal and stuff. But yeah, the band I am, of course, talking about is Breaking Benjamin, and the album that's up next and last on this video is Saturate by Breaking Benjamin. And this is probably Breaking Benjamin's most raw-sounding album. This album, they were heavily inspired by Tool. I mean, you can definitely hear some Tool influences going on this album. And yeah, it's a very solid album. I know that there's some Breaking Benjamin fans that say that this is their weakest album, which I don't agree with. We Are Not Alone is actually my least favorite Breaking Benjamin album, which I know is kind of unpopular, because I know some people would place that album above this album, which I personally wouldn't do, but I actually really like this album. I mean, you got songs like Wish I May, Polyamorous, Natural Life, Water, Home, No Games, Shallow Bay. There's a lot of great songs on this album. So Saturate by Breaking Benjamin, that's what's coming up next and last on this video. Pretty underrated album. So there you have it, guys. That is my list of the underrated debut albums, a list of 5 of them. So let me know what you guys think. Do you agree with this list? Are there any debut albums that you think are underrated? If so, of course, let me know in the comments. So with that being said, thanks for watching. Have a nice day. Take care.